This video is sponsored by Describe. Earlier this month, I made a video reviewing all of the Player's Handbook covers over the past 50 years, and I talked about what I think makes a great Player's Handbook cover, the weird pattern that a lot of these covers fall into, and why I liked the cover for the upcoming 2024 Player's Handbook. And I also wanted to talk about the Dungeon Master's Guide covers, but that video was just getting way too long, so I had to break it off into its own video. So here's how this works. I'm going to talk about each of the Dungeon Master's Guide covers that we have gotten over the past 50 years of this hobby, through the various editions of the game. And as we look at each cover, we're going to see the idea of the Dungeon Master's Guide cover evolve, as we eventually figure out what makes a great cover for a DMG. Because here's the thing, in my Player's Handbook video, I talked about how I had some clear criteria for what makes a good Player's Handbook cover. That's because I think a Player's Handbook cover has to do a lot more heavy lifting. They basically have to pitch the game to somebody who knows nothing about it, which means they have to communicate what it feels like to play these sorts of games. No other type of book in our hobby has quite the same pressure on it. In fact, the Dungeon Master's Guide especially doesn't assume it's the first book you're picking up, because you really can't run the game with just a DMG. Your players need their rules as well. Lots of games don't even have a distinct Game Master's Guide, they just put that information in the back of the core rulebook. So if your game has a DMG equivalent, it's basically an invitation that says, hey, you probably already know what this game is. How would you like to be the one in charge? And we'd actually look back at the history of the DMG covers across the years and see the way this idea has been communicated, and see it evolve over decades until it finally reached the modern day, where there are certain tropes that continue to recur across various Dungeon Master's Guide covers. And just a reminder, art is subjective, you might disagree with my opinions, and that's fine. But let's also be respectful of the creatives who produced each one of these covers. If I say that I don't like one of the covers we're discussing today, or there's something about it that I wish had been done differently, that is absolutely not an indictment of the artists. These artists are incredible, and even though I have a little bit of a background in art, I know for a fact that I could not draw anything nearly as well as anything that we're going to see on any of these covers. So if there's an issue I have with any of this art, it's usually got a lot more to do with the art direction, and what these editors and publishers have asked these artists to create, because I don't always agree with what they have chosen to put on the cover. And even then, whenever I'm being critical, I am not trying to disparage anybody who worked on any of these covers. I know everybody did their best. It is extremely difficult to paint a picture of anything D&D related and capture what everybody loves about the game, so I have a lot of sympathy for them. And speaking of painting a picture, when you're running your game and you need to paint a word picture but can't find the right words, you should check out today's sponsor, Describe. They're a really wonderful resource where you can find fantastic original descriptions of monsters, magic items, locations, NPCs, and anything else you might need to narrate in your TTRPG games. They've also got an incredible selection of gorgeous maps that you can drop directly into your VTT of choice. And each map comes with a set of descriptions to help you deliver the perfect narration for each corner of the environment. And we haven't even talked about their unbelievable library of music that you can play during your games. I mean, now we've talked about it, and Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK, you'll save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. The original D&D release didn't really have anything that resembled a Dungeon Master's Guide, though one booklet was titled Monsters and Treasure, and another was The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, both of which cover material that we might get in a modern DMG, with a little bit of monster manual thrown in for good measure. One of those booklets had a Pegasus on it, and the other had a dragon, and keep that in mind, because you just might see one of those creatures pop up on a few other Dungeon Master's Guide covers in the future. It's the dragon. There are dragons in other DMG covers. But as I said in my Player's Handbook video, the early D&D art was so limited in terms of what they could actually afford to commission and what they could afford to print that there's really just not much of a comparison to make between these three little brown books and the future Dungeon Master's Guides. But then we get the first Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced D&D, and it has got 3 adventurers fighting an Ifrit, a huge fire genie. He's holding a female hero who's holding a dagger, but don't worry, she's wearing a metal bikini, so she's protected. But what's really cool about this image is that the heroes in the foreground bear a passing resemblance to the Green Knight and the Blue Wizard from the D&D Basic set. The Knight's shield has a different emblem, but I think it's extremely unlikely that this was not meant to be a deliberate reference to those characters. And the message of this cover is very clear. If you play as the Dungeon Master, you get to play the bad guys. However, the reprint of the Dungeon Master's Guide conveys a very different idea. Here we see a human in green robes, probably a wizard, standing behind a set of ornate golden doors. He wears a huge key around his neck, so clearly he is the individual who can get you access to whatever is behind these doors. And behind this man is a huge hoard of gold. but there's also an army of monsters, orcs and goblins, and further back, some far less human creatures. This book essentially portrays the Dungeon Master as a wizard commanding powerful armies and guarding vaults full of treasure. And I think this idea really took off. I think it's the reason that some other pieces of art often depict the Dungeon Master as some sort of powerful spellcaster in a hood, someone controlling all of the strings. This seems to capture two of the core appeals of becoming a Dungeon Master: having all the secrets and having all the power. And here we see those ideas manifested with a visual concept, which will return and evolve in a few editions. But not just yet, because next we get 2nd edition, and the first cover depicts a dragon facing a wizard, but the whole scene is surreal. There are bubbles all around them like they're fighting underwater, and to add to that feeling, the wizard's body almost seems to be warped, though that might just be his beard and his robes getting caught in the current. There's also a lot of gorgeous color in this image. The spells in the wizard's hand and the fire around the dragon's mouth provide some really fantastic highlights, and the cooler colors of the wizard's robes and the surrounding environment help add some much-needed contrast. The message here is so clear, it is literally printed on the cover. This newly revised and updated version of the AD&D game provides everything Dungeon Masters need to create thrilling role-playing challenges. AKA, if you buy this book, then you'll know how to create scenes like this in your games. However, when AD&D 2nd edition was reprinted, we got this cover, which shows what looks like some orcs or ogres or giants bursting through a door in a dungeon. And this image just is not as compelling to me. Like, yes, it's obviously an action shot, and that's exciting, and it is a terrific piece of art, but it focuses a lot more on the aspect of being a Dungeon Master where you just throw monsters at heroes, and I consider that to be the least compelling part of the pitch of being a Dungeon Master. It's not irrelevant, lots of these covers have had and will have monsters on them. So why does this one lose points for having monsters on it? Why does this one not work for me? Well, because these monsters seem less powerful. In previous covers, we've got a formidable fire genie, a powerful dragon, and most relevant to this cover, we had some sort of wizard who had an army of monsters at his back. This cover seems to have just grabbed a couple of monsters from that army and put them front and center, and that just feels like a downgrade to me. That being said, this cover does do something very interesting when we compare it to the 2nd edition Player's Handbook reprinting. That cover featured some adventurers bursting through a door, making this Dungeon Master's Guide basically the evil mirror version of that cover. That's a really compelling concept, and these covers complement each other really well when they're side by side. But I just think that means the Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't stand alone all that well on its own. Your mileage may vary on that front, of course, because there is a lot to like with this image, but as we keep exploring some of the other Dungeon Master's Guides and find the common threads that unite my favorite covers, you'll see why this one ranks so low for me. But at least it's in the running for this conversation, which is more than I can say for the covers of the 3rd edition and 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guides, because these books are just doing their own thing. Once again, like all of the 3rd edition books, these covers look like tomes that you might find in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. While the Player's Handbook covers were covered with gems encrusted into them, the 3rd edition DMG has a keyhole on the front, which helps evoke the idea of secrets inside the book, and also draws a connection to the AD&D reprint cover with the key around the wizard's neck. The 3.5 cover features a world on the cover, which seems to highlight a different aspect of the DM's job, one that's actually present with very few of these covers: creating your own world, or at the very least, running the world. Now, I didn't really talk about these covers that much in my Player's Handbook video, so I guess I should address them here. Objectively speaking, I don't think the 3rd edition and 3.5 covers are good, purely because I don't think they do a good job of depicting what it's like to play the game. Except that's not totally true, because 3rd edition was kind of an impenetrable tome where every rule was laid out in overwhelming detail, so that kind of is evoked by these covers. And these book covers do feel like artifacts from the game world. They're intended to channel the feel of the game. They're meant to present this fantasy world with hidden knowledge. They're meant to evoke curiosity and wonder. And while I don't think they do a good job of onboarding new people to the hobby, the way that a lot of these other covers do, I mean, clearly they did just fine. 3.5 was a very popular edition. And I actually do have a lot of affection for these covers. I kind of love that they took a risk and went a completely different direction with the cover art for this whole edition. And I particularly like the fact that the DMG has very different iconography than the Player's Handbook, with the keyhole. And when we do the Monster Manual covers, we'll see my favorite example of how the 3rd edition core rulebooks evoke their contents with a cool cover detail. That being said, obviously this kind of cover just really is not compatible to any of the others we're discussing today, so we'll move on. Next we come to 4th edition, and this is honestly one of my favorite Dungeon Master's Guide covers of all time. First of all, we've got an awesome looking red dragon, in a cave, so it's a dragon in a dungeon, that's always nice to see. But the dragon is hunched over and looking at this crystal ball, watching some adventurers. And first of all, this is excellent shorthand to demonstrate that dragons aren't just unintelligent monsters, something the casual fantasy fan might not have assumed in 2008 after getting into the genre through Harry Potter and that one passing dragon reference in the Lord of the Rings films. But also, this image paints the picture of an entire storyline. The implication is that this is the final boss, either of the dungeon or the overall campaign, and he's watching the heroes as they prepare to move against him. And I get the sense that this dude is not just going to take that lying down. He's going to respond in some way. But the cherry on top, the thing that takes this cover from good to great, is the fact that the image he sees through his crystal ball is the same one that's on the cover of the Player's Handbook of that edition. They took this really interesting idea from the second edition reprints, the idea that the core rulebooks were somehow connected in some way through their covers, and they wove it into the story itself and came up with something that is much more interesting. Because it's not just enough to just put some monsters on the cover, which is where I think the 2E reprints fall short. I think putting a monster on the cover is fine for the monster manual, which we'll talk about in the next installment in this series, but those ogres didn't really evoke the feeling of being a DM, outside of just the vague idea of controlling the monsters in battle. Whereas this 4th edition cover actually captures exactly what a dungeon master does. We put the monsters in their layers, then we watch what the heroes do, and then we scheme. As far as I'm concerned, 4th edition cracked the formula for what makes a great DMG cover. A powerful, intelligent, scheming enemy. It's just fantastic. Which makes the cover for the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide 2 just completely baffling. I want to be clear, I actually think this is a terrific piece of art. It features 2 adventurers on an extremely steep set of stone stairs, looking across a misty abyss at some ruined towers. And I'd somehow never noticed this before making this video, but there are some, figures floating above the ramparts of those towers, and they seem to be wearing tattered clothes or robes and wielding swords, so they kind of give me strong undead vibes. This whole image feels like the artist saw the scene from Return of the King, where the hobbits climbed the stone stairs next to the Nazgul fortress, and just took a completely different spin on the same concept. I really like it. But why is it on the cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide? It's not really evocative of anything we just discussed, any of those ideas that have made some of the best DMGs work. And sure, you could argue that the editors and publishers might not have had that same idea in mind for what makes a great Dungeon Master's Guide cover, but considering that all future DMGs will feature some sort of intelligent foe, just like most of the previous ones did, it does kind of feel like the folks behind D&D already knew what made a great, or at least a decent, DMG cover. And this art just seems like such a strange choice. Now, if we're talking about what makes a great DMG cover, and we agree that showing some scheming, intelligent villain in their lair works really well for our purposes, then we have to give a shout out to the next DMG cover we got, the Pathfinder Gamemastery Guide. Because this cover channels both of the DMG covers I've loved so far. We've got an evil spellcaster in green robes and with a ton of power and wealth, and we've got a sinister looking dragon. I just love this art so much. There's so much detail around the throne. It's covered in runes, it's surrounded by potions and scrolls, there's an imp in a cage, the floor around the throne features chains and skulls, just to make sure you know this is a bad guy. The wizard is touching a glowing orb that might be a crystal ball, so it's reminiscent of some of those same ideas we saw in the 4th edition DMG, but he's also got some big nasty fuck-off staff or glaive that's glowing with magical energy, so you get the sense that he might be particularly nasty in a fight. And behind him, he has a dragon backing him up as his enforcer, or if you prefer, whispering in his ear and manipulating him, though that's not personally the impression I get from the art, but it's certainly a very reasonable interpretation. The 2nd edition Pathfinder cover has a lot of the same themes. We've still got a golden throne, a powerful villain-looking character, and a big dragon, but I think I personally prefer the 1st edition cover. The 2nd edition cover doesn't have any of those same signifiers that portray the human figure as a master planner working on multiple different plans, which you obviously don't need. That might not be as important to you, but I personally really like that approach, since I think it does a better job of capturing the experience of being a GM. The 2nd edition cover just feels like they're showing us a cool, interesting villain. Like, hey, look at this warrior with this dragon companion. Look, maybe they've taken over this throne. Maybe this is a usurper of some kind. On the other hand, the 1st edition cover is like the platonic ideal of a Dungeon Master's Guide cover, according to everything we've discussed so far. If somebody wanted to top this, they would have to add some sort of thematic idea to the cover. And how would you even be able to do that? Well, we'll get there. In 2014, we got the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide featuring the powerful and iconic Lich Acererak, casting some sort of spell on a wounded, probably undead warrior in the foreground. I like this piece of art. I think Acererak is a great villain to put on the cover of a book. You can never go wrong with a Lich, and he's got a great design. And the fact that he seems to be animating a corpse hits on some of what we've talked about already with the previous covers. We're seeing an evil bad guy doing the prep needed to execute their evil bad guy plans. However, I talked about this in the Player's Handbook video, but I think this just has way too much purple. The fact that the Undead Warrior is basically the exact same color as the Lich means that they blend together, and it just sort of flattens the image. Now, I mentioned this critique of the 5e core rulebooks in my Player's Handbook video, and a bunch of people commented that they actually really like the fact that each of the books is basically a solid color. It gives them a clear identity and makes it easier to pick them out of a lineup, even from across the room. You don't have to say, hand me the Player's Handbook. You should say, hand me the orange book, or the blue book, or the purple book. And I actually agree with this. I didn't get into it in discussing these covers in that last video, but I do think these covers complement each other really well. That being said, I think the individual covers suffer because of the way these chosen colors overpower their respective covers. It's just a shame that we have these really interesting, dynamic images that should be really powerful because there's a character in the foreground as well as the midground, but the character in the foreground keeps getting washed out into the midground villain. It's just a waste of the energy of the artist, to be honest. But at last that brings us to the cover of the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. This image features a cabal of villains facing the camera as if staring down the heroes. This definitely lines up with the first thing that we heard about the new DMG. While the Player's Handbook would put its emphasis on the heroes, the Dungeon Master's Guide would put a lot more focus on D&D's array of iconic villains. However, Josh Herman, head of art at D&D for Wizards, told the UK publication The Mirror that these enemies are actually intended to represent the amazing toolkit that DMs get to play with. The front row features an army of skeletons because those are the kind of low-level enemies your players will probably face all the time. The second row represents mid-level mini-bosses, presented here through Scylla the Warlock and Warduke the Heartless Mercenary. Both of these are members of the League of Malevolence. They've been iconic D&D bad guys since I think at least the 80s. Warduke was created for a toy line, but he also showed up in some D&D products and made an appearance in the 80s D&D cartoon, and he has specifically got beef with Strongheart, who appears in the 2024 Player's Handbook, which is a nice touch. It's a nice bit of synergy between these covers. And both Scylla and Warduke appeared in Wild Beyond the Witchlight a few years ago. Behind them in the image, performing some sort of ritual, we have Venger, the primary villain of the D&D cartoon. He's meant to represent the campaign-level villain who pushed the entire story forward. And behind him, we see another enemy, and to quote Josh Herman directly, behind all of that, in classic D&D style, we have a lurking Dracolich who might have actually been the mastermind working from behind the scenes all along, and is just beyond view. When we first heard that the DMG would use lots of iconic villains in its art, I saw at least one person worried that this would essentially feed the us versus them mentality that sometimes plagues this hobby. And I wasn't terribly worried about that personally. After all, not only do game masters play the villains in all of their campaigns, but I also personally loved the idea of D&D leaning more into using their iconic characters as examples, including their iconic villains. But I also know that villains only exist to offer a challenge and then get defeated, and I know not every game master is quite so good at remembering that their villains are actually supposed to lose, and you need to be okay with that. And weirdly, while I doubt that this was a conscious decision on the part of the designers, I do feel like this art piece actually kind of addresses these concerns, because if you are trying to communicate the idea that your antagonists should be big, dramatic villains who ultimately fail to stop the heroes, modeling them after the bad guys from a literal Saturday morning cartoon actually does communicate that idea pretty well. Now, I think this art piece itself is maybe the weakest of the three core rulebooks, but that's purely because of how it's staged. The imaginary camera is aimed straight on at the characters, which is a pretty undramatic angle. It also makes all of the characters roughly the same size. I think this image would benefit from being shot from a low angle, though that might make it too similar to the other two core rulebook covers, which are both shot from below, because it's a more dramatic angle. Or, if the designers were open to a more abstract image, they could have taken a cue from the covers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist and Waterdeep Dungeons of the Mad Mage. Those covers are incredible, and they managed to balance a lot of different villains in the frame while still making the image much more varied and much more interesting. Plus, I don't personally love Venger's design. I think Tyler Jacobson's redesign helps as much as it can, but it's still just a core design that just does not work with that much for me, and there's only so much that anyone can do without actually changing the core design. That being said, while this image does not have my favorite layout, I really like the ideas behind this cover. Each rank of villains could almost represent a different tier of play, and so not only does it depict what I've said I liked from these covers so far that feature intelligent villains like Venger and the Dracolich, but it's also literally already teaching you about how to construct a campaign right on the front cover. It promises an idea that this book isn't just going to teach you how to create adventures and villains, but also how you'll be able to string them together and form long campaigns that span multiple levels and bring your heroes into conflict with lots of different types of villains. Like, until we have the book, it still remains to be seen whether it will actually deliver on this promise and provide useful advice in this area, but because the cover art promises this concept, it kind of raises the bar for what we can expect from the cover art of a Dungeon Master's Guide. That being said, as an actual art piece, I still personally prefer the cover of Pathfinder's 1st edition Gamemastery Guide. Fun fact, this art, as well as the art for both of the 4th edition DMGs, were all done by Wayne Reynolds, who's probably my favorite tabletop RPG artist. I love how stylized his work is, and I also got really deep into this hobby during the days of 4th edition and Pathfinder. His art was everywhere at that time, so it is automatically iconic for me. But obviously these are just my feelings on the subject, so I'd love to know what you think. Which of these covers are your favorites? What do you think of the cover for the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide? Are you going to pick up this book when it comes out in November? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please ring the bell so you can stay up to date with all of my upcoming videos. I have some really fun ones coming out soon. You can support me financially on Patreon or Ko-fi or by becoming a YouTube member. I would also love for you to join my Discord server and sign up for my mailing list, and all of those links are in the doobly-doo below. If you're interested in more thoughts about being a dungeon master, click here for my video about how to help provide an immersive atmosphere at your D&D table. Until next time, play fair and have fun.